Edo-san, I have a question about Netherlands.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I heard recently Netherlands, a prison in Netherlands is very, very empty
Right.
because of the crime rate is very low.
Right.
Why Netherlands have a low crime rate?
I'm really glad you asked me this question. Well, I think this is probably a combination.
Yeah.
That's my first assessment. Probably a combination of equal income distribution and more lenient laws and maybe on top of that the penitentiary system. Where it's more focused on reintegration of bringing criminals back into society than it is, for example, in the United States, where the goal is basically to protect society against criminals. So they put them in jail and just let them there, and then and after their prison sentence is done, they put them back on the street, and usually they go back to committing crimes. In the Netherlands, we're trying to actually use that time to reintegrate people back into society so that they will not revert back into crime. So that is so there are less people flowing back into the criminal atmosphere. At the same time, less people are prone to crime because there is less division in society. There are fewer really poor people, so everybody has a kind of basic standard. So you don't need to commit crime to supply your daily needs, unless you are, of course, a drug addict, for example, or are in other financial problems. But so there are less people drawn into criminal activities because more equal income distribution and more leniency in our legal framework, so that allows people to do certain things like soft drugs without going to jail, and less people are going back in. So that's my assessment. But it's especially a good thing because I remember a couple of years ago this was published by the World Economic Forum, and they asked themselves the same question: Dutch prisons are so empty; they're being turned into homes for refugees. Why is that?
Refugees home route.
Right.
Great idea.
So instead of putting prisoners in there, why don't we put refugees in there? There are prisons who have been transformed into hotels.
Yeah.
They look pretty good, actually. They're very nice.
But is that possible?
It's possible. It's possible.
Why prison is prison empty?
A low criminal rate.
So
No, I can't believe it.
But okay, so let's see what they
Therefore, I asked Edo-san.
Right. So I do not have the precise answer. I don't have the facts, but I'm sure that they will have facts in here. So Dutch prisons are emptying fast. The numbers of prisoners in the Netherlands fell from 20,000 in 2006 to 10,000 in 2016. So in 10 years, it was reduced to 50% of what the numbers that it was. This is equal to about 59 prisoners per 100,000 population, according to the data from World Prison Brief. In comparison, the United States has the world's highest incarceration rate, 666 prisoners per 100,000. That's more than 10 times as many. The Netherlands' low incarceration rates are largely thanks to relaxed drug laws, a focus on rehabilitation, and an electronic ankle monitor system. So that's also rehabilitation, to put people back into... So basically, they don't keep them in prison, they put a bracelet around your ankle, and if you leave your house, it starts to beep, and the police will be alert and say, hey, you're not to leave your house within a range of 200 meters, for example. So you need to be able to go to the convenience store, but other than that, you're basically in prison. But without being in prison. So that's a relatively cost-effective way.
Cost-effective way. Oh.
These measures have resulted in closure of multiple prisons across the country in recent years. including the Bijlmerbuis in Amsterdam, which was shut down in 2016. This was the most famous prison in the Netherlands. The site is scheduled to be demolished and converted into housing this year, but in the meantime it has been transformed into a creative hub called Lola Lick, which includes a space for startups, a language school, and a coffee shop. They're dealing drugs. Lola Lick is also neighbor to the Wenkebach Refugee Center, where up to 1,000 people are offered accommodation while seeking asylum. Guests
So
arriving...
they have 10,000 prisoners, right?
No, more than 10,000. They have... Yeah, 10,000. You're right.
Still 10,000 people.
10,000
but
people
the
in prison.
10,000 people are released.
Yes.
God.
Guests arriving at the center...
You
are
said 10,000 people, they're wearing bracelet and...
No, they're not only wearing bracelet. They're also, because of the laws, etc. So less people are incarcerated. They call it, put in prison, and less people are put back into prison after they've been released. So the law has become more lenient, and less people are coming back. Plus, they use this system of these bracelets. There is, however, controversy about it, because some of these prisoners are not there for nothing. They actually have a criminal tendency, and they make the same mistake. So sometimes they just take off the bracelet and run. Sometimes they commit the same crimes that they committed before. There is a famous sex offender who actually killed somebody while he was on probation, so there is this constant discussion about, okay, what do we need to protect society, yes or no, and it will always remain a discussion. Alongside this project, the City of Amsterdam and various partners signed an agreement designed to help refugees secure employment opportunities, according to the report featured in Fast Company. This initiative reflects Amsterdam's policy of actively fostering and encouraging activities aimed at inclusion of refugees. Bijlmerbuis is just one of several prisons to undergo such a transformation. A report by NBC News highlights several empty prisons, including the Koepel in Haarlem near Amsterdam, which has been converted into a temporary space for asylum seekers. We had to think twice about using prisons with cell doors, Janet Helder, a board member with the Dutch government agency responsible for housing asylum seekers, told the Associated Press. Some people in the neighborhood asked, how can you put people from Syria who have been imprisoned in a cell here? So we decided that if people really have a problem with it, we will find somewhere else for them. Reimagined spaces are also becoming increasingly common elsewhere. For example, Bayview Correctional Facility in New York City was recently converted into a women's building, a dedicated space designed to help promote partnerships and create networks. According to a blog on the company's website, the women's building stands for what's possible when potentials of girls and women is nurtured rather than locked away. Though it's very structured and planning, it serves a new kind of justice and based on collaboration, partnership, fairness and equity. In Slovenia, meanwhile, a former Yugoslavian military prison was converted into a youth hostel in 2003, following a campaign by activists between 1993 and 2001 to renovate the space. The hostel's owner said the prison was artistically upgraded and the space for confinement into an open space, place for personal freedom and artistic expression. While each room is unique, the hostel says they still have one thing in common: prison bars on the windows and doors. Well, actually, there are other examples in the Netherlands. I know a prison in Geleen in Limburg that has been transformed into a hotel as well. It looks very nice, actually. It's a very nice space. They opened the walls between two cells and converted it into a nice open space for prisoners. But the bigger news is, okay, we can keep an eye on these people. We can make sure that they are not completely isolated from their environment. and that makes the gap between incarceration and being back and regaining your freedom much smaller. So it will also mean that for prisoners, they will be able to adjust themselves more easily to the situation. As I said, there is still some opposition in the Netherlands against it because basically, if people start to run, they will be unaccounted for until they are captured again. So that's a danger. So not everybody will be able to get this kind of treatment. There will be a selection, but as always, that is subjective. People will be. This is also a legal system, right? So they did. If the legal system determines the prison sentence, and the prison sentence could be electronic. They call it electronic incarceration. Basically, so you can stay home, but you cannot go anywhere.
Anyway.
So, yeah.
That sounds good.
So basically, compared to the States, the States has 10 times more prisoners per 100,000 inhabitants. So the costs that we make are much lower. Partly it's explained by this electronic supervision. But it also has to do with. Even if you double the numbers, if you take the electronic supervision out of the equation, then still there are much less prisoners in the Netherlands than in the United States. I don't know do you have any idea what the numbers are in Japan? The number of people incarcerated in Japan.
No, I don't know that.
But I would estimate that it's closer to